Hello and welcome to The Last Word. Have yesterday's momentous developments in Egypt thrown this critical country into turmoil or placed it on the path of real democracy? That's the subject tonight. My guests are India's former ambassador to Egypt, Shiv Mukherjee, the well-known West Asia expert Wael Awad, Professor for West Asian Studies at Jawaharlal Nehru University, A.K. Ramakrishnan, and the former US diplomat, Walter Anderson. Let's start by trying to understand what happened last night in Egypt. Wael Awad, in your eyes, was this a military coup or a popular uprising?
Well, I will not support any military coup, no matter where it is. But I think what the military have done is a soft coup, that they have been a reflection of the street of Egypt. You cannot control 25 millions of people in the street are demonstrating to the also regime that they are not welcome anymore. Because if you take by the statistic, it was only 10 million people who voted Morsi into power. So therefore, the army has no other option but to succumb to the pressure of the street. And that is why they have been, even if you noticed yesterday, when the statement of the army was there, they were saying they had all the Coptic, Al-Azhar, the youth, the revolutionaries, people all around, secular forces. And that's a clear signal that we are not interested in power. We will give it to a civilian government.
Shiv Mukherjee, Wael Awad called it a soft coup. In your eyes, does last night's momentous development mean that the Arab Spring has now turned into autumn, or has it in fact refound and perhaps refreshed its revolutionary roots?
I don't think it's turned into autumn, but the Arab Spring is showing signs of very uncertain weather, certainly, because I think Egypt is at a dangerous crossroads. I don't really buy this definition of a soft coup or a hard coup. The fact is that a constitutionally elected government, whether it was deserved or not is another matter, probably it deserved it, was overthrown by army diktat. Therefore, it was a coup. But the fact remains, I do agree with Wael that perhaps the army at that time had very little choice. Perhaps they also calculated that the anger on the streets right now is directed against the Morsi government, and that anybody who assists in that process and pushes the Morsi government out will probably gain the sympathy of the people. Which calculation was actually correct, because the people applauded the army for what they had done.
True. Walter Anderson, you've heard Shiv Mukherjee say that Egypt is at a critical, perhaps even a dangerous crossroads. Now clearly, Mohammed Morsi and the Muslim Brotherhood cannot accept what's happened. And late last night, Al Jazeera was reporting news of possible clashes in Upper Egypt where their support is at the greatest. Is there a danger that last night's developments could propel Egypt somewhere towards some sort of civil war or civil strife?
Well, there have already been clashes reported in Egypt on a rather low scale yet. But to answer the question as to whether or not this is a coup, to a large extent that's in the eyes of the beholder. The statements of the Muslim Brotherhood are already that this is a coup that will be resisted. For the hundreds of thousands, if not millions, who are on the street, this was to advance a process that is going on. Much will depend on next steps, whether the military really tries to have an inclusive government that moves forward and honors its commitment to have early elections. Then this will be a process of greater democratization in Egypt. But we are at a crossroads. This could be very dangerous depending on what the various significant actors do next.
Professor Ramakrishnan, you've just heard Walter Anderson say a lot depends upon how inclusive is the government the army ushers in. Now last night, as Wael Awad was pointing out, there was a very deliberate choreography at that announcement when Morsi was deposed, when the constitution was suspended, when an interim government was appointed and new fresh elections were announced. General El-Sisi, the army chief, was accompanied by the Sheikh of Al-Azhar, by the Coptic Pope, as well as Muhammad al-Baradei. Did that suggest to you that there is a substantial element of nationwide support behind the step the army has taken?
Obviously, there is a people's movement going on in Egypt. At the same time, one cannot deny the fact that there is a military coup. So both are together now, and there is an expression of a kind of deep state coming into the fore. The soft cracks of democratic politics over the last 2 years.
Can I interrupt?
Is in a way.
Can I interrupt, Professor Ramakrishna? What about the choreography of that announcement with the Sheikh of Al-Azhar President, the Coptic Pope, and Muhammad Baradai? Was that a deliberate attempt to suggest nationwide support for the step the army's taken?
Surely, yes, to show that it will be an inclusive kind of political process. But at the same time, there was an arrest of Muslim Brotherhood leadership. There was shutting down of channels which supported Morsi government, and therefore the image of inclusiveness is also dented a little bit.
Okay. Now, Wailawad, let's focus for a moment on what this means for Egypt's very young and still fledgling democracy. Has it suffered a serious blow? Because the first freely and fairly elected president was deposed literally just a year after he took office. Or is it on the path to some rebirth because Morsi was ignoring the opposition, defying the Supreme Court, and clearly mishandling the economy? Which do you think it is?
I think I subscribe to the second paragraph of yours, which is speak loudly of the current situation and the resentment in the street current. The Egyptian people did not go in the street because they didn't have a better job, they didn't have a better, opportunities. They know the economy is in a shambles. They know the situation in the country is quite bad. Tourism has taken a beat back. But you must also see that the dignity of the Egyptian, the identity of the Egyptian is at stake, because the Muslim Brotherhood tried to give it a monolithic Islamic nations by imposing their ideology on the people of Egypt. Therefore, they were not happy to see that the heterogeneous society of Egypt is being taking a beat back from the Muslim Brotherhood. And they have been for 85 years, away from power, given to the helm of power. They didn't know how to rule. So 365 days of misdeeds have really taken Egypt back, and the people of Egypt realized, no, this is not the government we fought for. Therefore, I call it a second revolution and the true revolution of the Egyptian uprising.
Rashid Mukherjee, there's no doubt that the line you just heard from Wailawad, that this was about dignity, not religion, was said by many young and middle-aged Egyptians on television last night. But on the other hand, can you have meaningful democracy if the army isn't prepared to wait till the next elections and chooses instead to get rid of a leader freely and fairly elected by a square majority just because they don't like him and his policies?
Well, the majority was actually rather thin. In fact, it was razor thin. But that doesn't matter. That
but it was more than 50%, and that's what counts. It was nearly 52.
It was more than 50%. That's right. And therefore, to that extent, as I said, I firmly believe it was a coup. It was an overthrowing of a constitutional order which reflected the elections that took place and which the world accepted with all its little flaws, with the world accepted as free and fair. Having said that, in real politics, Mr. Mohammed Morsi, I think, has only himself to blame for the situation he finds himself in. He was a minor leader of the Ikhwan al-Muslimin. He promised various things which he has not delivered. But then I really do not think that non-delivery of what the people expect is the sole cause, because if that were the case, you would probably have a revolution in about 70% of the countries of the world.
Absolutely, no democracy would survive.
Absolutely. There are other factors at play, and here I differ slightly with my friend when he talks about the dignity of the Egyptian. This is absolutely true. That's what they said when they ousted Mubarak. But I think the economic shambles that Egypt finds itself in is very much buttresses the anger that the youth feel. For years, I mean, when I was there, for instance, my friends used to tell me all the time that there are hundreds of thousands of Egyptians who can't get married because they don't have a job.
Quite right.
Egypt's revenues are substantially due to tourism, the others being oil from the Sinai.
Except
Yes,
let me
go
stop
ahead.
you there. Governments in all democracies are often guilty of misgovernance, yet that must never become an excuse, leave aside a justified explanation for removing them, particularly by military coup. In this instance, Walter Anderson, you have an army that has once again not only tasted power, but acted in accordance with its own whim and wishes. Is there a danger that now the power of the Egyptian army will get entrenched in whatever democracy Egypt hereafter sees?
Oh, absolutely. I think there have been two key issues at stake here. One is the one you've just mentioned. The military in Egypt clearly thinks of itself as the ultimate guarantor of unity in the country, and it saw instability and therefore moved. You have militaries like that in many parts of the world, including one very close to India, where the notion of the military was being ultimate guarantor, and it moved. My guess is that's going to be a major challenge that the Egyptian political system will have to face, is the role of the military in the future in Egypt. I mean, it has moved because it felt that instability was threatening the country. The other issue that's at stake here is whether or not an Islamic government can function in a liberal democratic system. And that has implications for much of the Middle East, including what might emerge in Syria.
Absolutely.
And it's somewhat questionable. I have one other thing I'd like to add in it. Many of you may have seen Francis Fukuyama's very interesting study of the middle class in revolt, in which he actually focuses on Turkey and Brazil, but one could also apply this to Egypt, where you've had a large expansion of the middle class over the last 10, 15 years. The middle class is able to organize. It's technology savvy. It often is quite young, and it's willing to strike out when it feels that things aren't operating well. And if you look at the crowds that were in Egypt, they were predominantly middle class. These were not the very poor. This was the middle class striking out against inefficiency. The question is whether the Egyptian political system can ever provide the form of governments that this much more discriminating middle class demands.
Absolutely, and that's an issue I promise I will take up in part 2, and it's an issue that is very close to the politics that we have experienced in urban India in the last year and a half as well. But before I come to that, Professor Ramakrishnan, you study Egypt. You've been academically involved in trying to understand what's happening. What do we know about both General Sisi, the army chief, and Adli Mansour, the interim president? Both of them were appointed to their jobs by outgoing President Morsi, and Mr. Mansour just literally 2 days ago. What do we know about them? What sort of people are they?
The interim president is there in the judiciary for quite a long period of time now. He became the deputy chief of the constitutional system in 1992.
Yes, but he became
so
Chief Justice just 2 days ago. What do we know about him? What sort of person is he?
He is regarded as a neutral person who is, Morsi himself had faith in him, and the opposition had faith in him. That shows that he is supposed to be a neutral person.
And what about El Sisi? What about El Sisi?
He was also, Morsi put a lot of confidence in him, but in both cases, all turned against him as far as Morsi is concerned.
So, in fact, in addition to all his other failings, former President Morsi also turns out to be a very bad judge of character. He appointed a wrong man as army chief and very possibly elevated the wrong man to be Chief Justice of the Constitutional Court. Gentlemen, let's take a break. When I come back, I want to turn to the critical question: what is the future that faces the Muslim Brotherhood, and beyond that, to Islamist forces, not just in Egypt, but in the Middle East as a whole? That's in a moment's time. See you after the break. Welcome back to The Last Word. We're discussing last night's momentous developments in Egypt. Wahid, let's come to what last night's developments mean for A, the Muslim Brotherhood, and B, I suppose, Islamism in general. Egypt, as you know, was the birthplace of political Islamism, as it's now called, in the late 1920s, and yet today, the same country has rejected the Muslim Brotherhood. What do you make of that?
I think the army have understood the game plan very well, and they allowed the Muslim Brotherhood really to rule for a year, and the people of Egypt realized that they are not really ready to rule Egypt. Egypt cannot be ruled by the Muslim Brotherhood because they are trying to give it one image. Karan, if you look at the street of Egypt, now it is polarized as well. The society has been polarized, not only in the party lines. It has also polarized in the social fabrics of the people, where you have the social, we have the liberal forces, the democratic forces, everybody at one side, and the Muslim Brotherhood and their affiliated groups on the other hand. That is not the Egyptian what they wanted really from the Muslim Brotherhood. I think they have taken the beat back. The youth of the Muslim Brotherhood are also feeling disappointed because most of their leaders were not able to come down to the street and give them a support, the moral support. So here again you are having a vacuum on the leadership of the Muslim Brotherhood. I think the next election, people of Egypt will really think twice before voting these people back into power, and they may be a small majority, but we can't wipe them out.
Shiv Mukherjee, if Egypt is not ready or prepared to have Muslim Brotherhood rule, then what will be the repercussions in other Arab states which equally have fairly sizable Islamist groups vying for power?
Well, first of all, let me say that organizations like the Islamic Brotherhood, the entire philosophy propounded by Hassan al-Banna was capture of the state and rule according to the Islamic tenets of the Sharia. So the fact that they may be rejected in a free and fair election will not really matter to them very much. In fact, I think it will spur them on to other means of expanding their influence, many of them violent means. I do agree with Mr. Vaid that Egypt is now a deeply polarized society.
Okay.
In fact, it's not a polarized society or one against the other. It's a multipolar polarized society. And one of the poles is the Islamic Muslimin, supported by Islamists like the Salafists and others. And this is going to have a repercussion in not just Egypt in the future, but in other countries as well. Because if you notice what's happening in Syria, if you notice in some other countries in the Middle East, when an oppressive regime falls and free and fair elections take place, very often it's the Islamist party that wins, like in Tunisia, like in Egypt, because they are, even through the years of repression, in Syria, for instance, to be a member of the Ikhwan al-Muslimin, the punishment is capital punishment, was. So frankly, the ability that they have to switch tactics is always there.
Okay.
And they are an organized force.
We're running out of time, so let me quickly bring in Walter Anderson. You're hearing that this is going to have sizable implications not just for Egypt but for the entire West Asian region. It's a region in which America is deeply interested and has a long association. What role do you see Washington trying to play hereafter? Because Obama clearly has a problem. If he accepts this is a military coup, he has to stop the 1.5 billion or 2 billion aid that Egypt gets from Washington. But on the other hand, it's now pretty clear that El-Sisi had been in touch with Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel, and so he may believe he has a certain measure of American endorsement for what he did last night.
Well, I think you are suggesting the dilemma that the Obama administration is in, which is why it's handled this with extreme caution. It has not called this a coup. It has advocated adhering to a democratic process, and it's hoping, I think, that the situation will quickly move to an electoral situation with a new government. But I'd like to say one other thing that was mentioned before about...
Very quickly, Mr. Anderson, because we're out of time. Very quickly.
Okay. And that is, Islamist movements tend to be well organized, and its opposition is not. That's the dilemma that you face in much of the Middle East. You have a middle class which is leading these revolts, and it's not organized.
True, very true. Very quickly, Professor Ramakrishnan, because time is our enemy. What do you make of the fact that King Abdullah in Saudi Arabia has clearly welcomed the coup? After all, here you have a Wahhabi monarchy welcoming the overthrow of a Muslim Brotherhood president. What do you make of that? But a very quick answer, because we're horribly out of time.
The An-Nur party in Egypt, which was an ally of the Muslim Brotherhood, is supporting the new system now, the interim government now, and which is funded by Saudi Arabia. And for a change, you have Syria and the Saudi king now supporting the same regime.
Absolutely. I would have to stop you there, but that's one of the very interesting ironies of today's Arab world. The Syrians and the Saudis, who are enemies and at daggers drawn, both end up supporting the overthrow of the Morsi government. Well, my thanks to all four of my guests for joining me for this fascinating discussion. And if you have been, thanks for watching. Goodbye. Good night.